And in England, I think you and I watched that car together. The car ran around, looked delightful, and then as it got close to the driving change, it started to develop a misfire and started to lose performance. It was still going. And then it pulled into the pits for the driver change and popped the driver in, hit the starter motor, and let me tell you, there wasn't even a click. Nothing. Not that it wouldn't crank over, there just wasn't even a click. It was, they just, and I said to them at the time, always not paying the bill. I'm not trying to pick on Bell, although I guess we've said nice things about them, and now perhaps I've been critical. But they learned that lesson.
Yeah, I mean, if you're used to playing with water systems, you understand the head of hydraulic head in water systems. Well, there's a very similar law in electrics. If you haven't got a sufficient head of electricity, nothing works.
Yep. Wiring systems. How many of you have wiring diagrams for your car? All of you, or a pretty good percentage. How many of you have each one of your wires labeled at the connector? Good for you. That's a better percentage than I expected. How many of you use watertight plugs? Good.
How do you know they're watertight?
Did you test them?
Because the brochure said so?
You took somebody else's word for it?
The advertising agency wouldn't tell that?
I'm sure they wouldn't. Check and double check.
And there's this stuff called elastic, isn't it?
Yeah?
Known in racing terms as gorilla snot. Pardon the fun, but seals up electrics. Water and electrics don't mix, so a fair chance here we're going to have a wet event. How many DNFs have we seen with cars, short circuits caused by water in the electrics, poppity pop, bang, stop, all over. Your whole year's work just wasted.
The other thing on the way these electrics are dealt with, too many wiring looms, you see, are dangling in space or laying on the hot engine to melt down nicely. You know, what's wrong with the odd little gutter channel or tying them along a frame tube correctly? Why do they just drape around in space like spaghetti?
I don't know if you guys have seen these things, but they're clever little nylon strips with a toothed serrated edge. I think they call them zip ties or cable ties or something, don't they? Tie wraps. Tie wraps, that's the ones. A good example of that is, who was here last year? Okay, who saw the car from the University of Sydney, University of New South Wales? That drove out in the Enduro, drove 100 metres, blew a fuse and stopped. Okay. One of the chances you take when you make an aluminium monocoque chassis, you've got wires lying in aluminium, and if you get rubbed through and you get a short circuit, the fuse blows. Okay, who then saw, once the car was fixed and we allowed them to have a little drive just for fun, who then saw the car go out and immediately lap at speeds that would have won them the endurance event? So there we have a simple short circuit through dodgy wiring, unrestrained wiring, rubbed through, short circuit, cost that team a probable victory. Well, certainly a possible victory, and certainly a podium finish. And it's just so important.
Good wiring starts with details.
It also tells the design judges a lot. When we go and look at a car and the wiring looks like a rat's nest, that tells us something about the team that are running this car.
Absolutely.
Doesn't help you one little bit.
We see a car that's got tidy wires, color-coded wires.
They are being supercilious up here. What about throttle pedal brakes? We sat here and watched the cars go around, and a very significant number of those cars had light switches for the throttle. And they were driven like light switches by the driver. The throttle was either on or off. Okay. What do you think the effect of that is? Do you think that affects the grip? Do you think that affects the fuel economy? Do you think that affects the driver's heart rate? Do you think that affects the lap speeds you're doing? All these things are important. Why not a nice and linear throttle? If we're going to talk about throttles, what about all these monkey motion special throttles that we see? There are about 2 or 3 designs that actually work well, and for teams who don't have the ability to research and develop a very complex throttle like like the one Jeff's involved with Oxford Brookes. The butterfly makes a lot of sense.
Butterfly gives you quite good control. If you area rule it or put it in a larger section of the pipe rather than the orifice size, you can obviously get away without any losses across it. You can also, if you want the linkage between opening angle and torque, you can arrange that, because you can always put a slightly eccentric cam onto the end of the lever, so the cable is changing its radius as you roll around the throttle. That's done on lots of production cars to make it feel easier. On spring rates, a driver's foot can only stand about 10 kilos on a racing shoe. Okay? His foot goes dead after that. So normally that's about the max spring loads you can be running in the system. And in fact in F1 or series like that, we actually arrange for a falling spring rate. So it's 10 kilos closed, because we want to make that thing close. If you're headed for the Armco or a wall at India 200, when he lifts his foot, he wants to know the thing's going to shut. So you make sure that it gets stronger and stronger towards shut. But if he wants to keep it open, you don't want to kill his foot. So we arrange for the spring rate to fall, not rise.
These little things that you never even think of, but they're so important. And whilst we're all talking about that, probably the biggest single design fault that we see is a kind of subjective one, and that's ergonomics. Even some of the very best of the cars here, I just couldn't slide. In my racing years when I was younger and slimmer, I couldn't have sat in it for more than 5 minutes, and unfortunately the race here is much longer than that. Is ergonomics important?
Ergonomics is vitally important. It's your mission as a race engineer to make this car as comfortable as an easy chair. You should make your car so comfortable that your driver can fall asleep in it while he's waiting to start the race. The more difficult you make this for your driver, the more he's going to have to concentrate on small ergonomic issues that are going to cost him lap time. Make your car easy to drive by making your car comfortable. It's that simple. We see countless ergonomics errors where the car is difficult to sit in. You hit your knees on this bar or that strut or this steering strut, and or your ankles or any one of a number of other things that protrude into your side or whatever. Make your car as comfortable as possible. Keep in mind, pedal efforts have to be within reasonable limits. Throttles have to be within reasonable limits. Steering force has to be within reasonable limits. The lower you can make these forces, the more comfortable it is for the driver, the easier it's going to be for the driver to withstand a long endurance event. Ergonomics can't be understated. It's very important.
Carrying on from that a little bit, a very significant number of cars here had nonsensically small steering wheels. Now these little steering wheels may work very well on a Nintendo Game Boy device. They do not work very well for the driver who's having to work out there on the racetrack. You need, the chassis designer needs to engineer into the car some work for the driver to do. That's how the driver gets the feedback. We hear teams say that they design cars for, say, 0 steering offset or whatever. These cars need some steering offset. They need some steering offset so that the jacking that is put into the car is reacted through the driver's arms as work. And so there's a tactile feedback loop that allows the driver to feel the cars. Jeff and I watched today a car, the little Dortmund car. Now I want to talk, is anybody here from the Dortmund team? Okay. We could see that driver had very, very little tactile feedback from the front wheels, and he was actually fishing around with it, going fast, but fishing around with the steering wheel, trying to get the feel, because there was no feedback. Now, if you now try to react this feedback through a little 8-inch steering wheel, after 2 laps the driver's thumbs have gone asleep, after 4 laps his arms have pumped up, and after 5 laps he's making mistakes and knocking cones over, and he gets out of the car with 2 dead arms. A decent sized steering wheel, you know.
I think this is a good place to knock off. We've got to get them upstairs.
Okay, we do indeed. It's now 12 minutes to. So one last question. Here's your last chance. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you all very much for coming.